So, of course, I want to say thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Cody Armstrong, and as you can see from the slide, we're talking about 17 of Onshape's greatest tech tips. And so what we want to do with this webinar is kind of parse down our most popular tech tips, put them all into a single webinar, and try and cover as many of them as we could in an hour. So that was the goal. I wanted to point out just some of the I think most popular tech tips and the tech tips that most users, most serious Onshape users should be using. Now, as I always say with these webinars, we really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. There's a questions dialog in the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to ask any questions as I'm going through this, and we'll do our best to stop and address the questions as we're going through things. A big thing with the questions, and it's an important part, especially to what we're talking about here today, is a lot of the tech tips, a lot of the FAQs, a lot of the new functionality even is driven around a lot of the questions you give us. So we really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. A lot of these tech tips were created based on questions in a webinar. So again, just trying to highlight, please ask any questions you'd like, and I'll do my best to stop and address them as we're going through this. So I don't have much in terms of an intro to this. Real simple. Our agenda today is just to walk through 17 of Onshape's best tech tips. And again, best is going to be relative to so my opinion of some of our best tech tips. But I think for the average Onshape user, a lot of these are going to be important to your day-to-day use. So let's dig right into things. Again, feel free to ask any questions that you'd like in the GoToWebinar interface, and I'll do my best to stop and address them. So let's get started. Now, the way I'd like to do this is kind of like the old school radio countdowns, where you start on the bottom of the list and you work your way to number 1. And so that means that we're going to start with number 17. And number 17 is probably one of the biggest tech tips that I have for the users, and it's one of the most common questions that we get, and that is measure. Where is measure? How do I find measure? How do I use measure? Now, one thing I'm going to say about today's webinar, just forgive me in advance, normally I don't do a lot of switching back and forth, but this one, just because of the nature of it, I'm going to be doing a lot of jumping back and forth between documents and slides, so please forgive me now. So let's go over this. Now, measure is a big one, and I think a lot of users, even non-CAD users, are asking, how do I find measure? Maybe someone has shared a model with me, and I need to be able to take measurements from it. So the important thing to keep in mind is measure is integrated directly into Onshape. It's not a button in the interface. In other words, you don't click measure and then click on the things that you want. You simply select the things that you want. In the bottom right corner, you'll always see a measure. And if I select a circle, for example, in the bottom right corner, you'll see the measurement for it, right? If I select 2 circles, I get the distance between those 2 circles in the bottom right corner. So it's important to keep in mind you're not selecting a separate icon and then initiating it. You just simply select the geometry you want to measure, and the measurements will appear in the bottom right. Now, it's simple things. If I select a circular edge, for example, I get the diameter. If I select 2 circles, I get the distance between them. So a lot of the common thing, if I select 2 flat faces, for example, I get the distance between them. But it's also things like mass. One of the more common questions I get is how do I tell how much a part weighs? Well, assuming you've assigned it a material, you can select in the bottom right corner the mass. And I'll show you this as well. But again, key thing to keep in mind with Onshape, there is not a button for measure. It's just on. You'll see it always in the bottom right corner. All right, so let me show you this. Now, real simple to use. So let's jump into a document here. And let's say that I want to take a measurement from this model. Maybe I want to measure the diameter of this hole. I left click the edge, and again, you'll see in the bottom right, the measurement will appear. Now, if I select more than one entity, if I select this circle, then this circle, I'll get a minimum distance between the 2 circles. But you can expand this. So I can click the plus, and it will give me more details about the measurement that I've taken. In this case, it will give me the minimum distance, but also the delta values, the X, Y, and Z, center distance between the 2 circles, right? And then also length and so on. So again, important detail to keep in mind. You can select, a face, an edge, a combination of things, and then get the details for that. For instance, here's a face where I get the area of that face. And again, entirely built into Onshape. I'm not clicking a separate button. Just click on the entity you want to measure, and the measurement will appear in the bottom right. Again, if you want more details on measure, all you need to do is click the little up arrow, and it will give you all the details of the measurement, the X, Y, and Z values and so on. Now, I mentioned before mass. So simple measurements are easy. Just click the entities that you want, and you have a measurement between them. But there's also the idea, of course, of mass properties associated with a part, and that's when we get into, more importantly, materials. So the key thing to keep in mind before you try and take a mass measurement is to assign a material, right? And let's go ahead and assign aluminum 6061, green check. And so now I've assigned a material. If I select the part, you'll see a little mass icon in the bottom right corner. Okay, so in the bottom right corner, you'll see that little mass icon. It will launch the mass properties dialog. So mass properties, like the name implies, gives you the properties of the part and its mass. So you see the weight here, volume, center of mass, another commonly asked question. All of those details will appear in that bottom right corner. So again, it's the mass properties icon in the bottom left corner. And you get to it by selecting a part or a combination of parts, or even an assembly. You'll see this mass properties icon. That will, of course, tell you the details like the weight and the center of gravity and so on. But the important thing, again, all of these things are just built into that bottom right corner. So whether you're selecting a measurement or you want to figure out the mass, you'll find it here in that bottom right corner. So that is measure. A question that's popped up: are you planning to make it possible to enter a user-entered material and density? And the answer is yes. Custom materials are not currently supported. You can't insert your own material. We have a long list to choose from, but of course we recognize the need for inserting custom materials, and that's something that we hope to implement in the near future. So absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about measure. And that's tip 17. Again, just pointing out that it's built right into Onshape. It's not a command or a toolbar or a button that you have to select. Now, the next thing I want to point out is changing units, mixing units, and how do we manage units in general. And it's just one of the more commonly asked questions I get. How do I change Onshape's default units? How do I change the units of a specific document? And how can I enter units that are different than that document while sketching or while editing values? And you can do all of these things. You can change the defaults, you can change the document units, and you can mix the units within a single dimension. Now, questions popped up. Are you planning to enable the extraction of part properties into variables to be processed within SwiftCalcs? I would say that we are planning more part property mapping options, absolutely. Specific to mass and inertia, I'm not familiar with, but I do know we are working on better part property mappings and so on. Question: would love to share selected parts from a part studio. Any recommendations how to solve that right now? Yes, use the derived feature to insert the part into a separate document. It's not an ideal solution, but it allows you to share, insert the parts. They're linked to the original. You can insert the assembly and then share that as a separate entity. So again, when you share your document, I'm going to show you this in a moment. You're sharing the entire document. If you want to share just a part or an assembly within it, it's best to use derived and insert that into a separate document. All right, so can you go over again how to use measure, min, max for distance holes? It will just default to that. You'll see min and max values in that measure. So just select two holes. And when you expand the details, you'll see them in that list. So forgive me if anyone's having any audio issues. Let me know if you're having any kind of issues with hearing me. So changing and mixing units. First off, how do you change units? That's the most commonly asked question and one of the first big tips that I have. How do I change the default units that Onshape uses when creating a new document? And the answer, and it's the answer to a lot of what I'm going to cover here today, is under your account settings, a lot of this can be managed. So a big tip that I have, and it's a lot of what we're going to talk about here today, under the top right corner, you'll see your username. And if you click the drop down, you'll see Manage Account. This is all of your account settings. The important ones that I want to point out here today are under preferences. Under preferences, you have units. You can choose from any of these units in the dropdown, and this will become the default units going forward. So an important thing to keep in mind, you don't have to use inches as your default units. You can change that to millimeter, for example. Save it. Important step, make sure once you're done to save units, and then any document going forward will automatically be those units. So important thing to keep in mind again, you can change the default units, and all documents will then follow that. Now, the question then comes up, well, what if I've already created a document? How do I go about changing the units for that one document? The answer is under the Documents menu. So while in a document, you'll see a menu in the top left corner. If I select it, you'll see Workspace Units. Select Workspace Units, and you can change the units of that individual document. Okay. Now, the last thing that I wanted to mention here is if I'm in a document with a certain style of units, right? So this is an inch document, for example. If I'm in a document with a certain style of units and I start sketching, for example, let's add a corner rectangle, and then I dimension an entity. This is, of course, inch part. I'm using an inch template to drive everything. But there may be scenarios where you need to change units. Maybe not for the entire document, but for an individual dimensions. There might be scenarios where I largely design in inches, but I need a few metric dimensions, or vice versa, right? The important thing I wanted to point out, you can enter mixed units. So I can say 30 mm, and it will do the conversion for me in the actual dimension dial, right? So just keep in mind, it's not visually changing it, but the metric value is there. So it's just doing the conversion for me. And the same thing goes for inch, by the way. You can convert in a metric part to inch just by typing inch. But a key thing, another commonly asked question, if you have a part that's largely one unit style, but then maybe one or two dimensions are a different one, you can just type in that value, type in the units, and it will convert it for you. So again, you can change the units on the default level, all future documents. You can change the individual units of an individual document, or you can even enter in the units for a specific dimension and it will automatically convert it. So if you're doing a lot of mixed unit style modeling, that can be an important one. We also added, by the way, the ability recently to switch the unit style to drawing level 2. So if you do insert this as a dimension, I could switch this unit to 30 millimeters and still have all the other dimensions showing up as inch, again, or vice versa. Another question that's been asked is, can I type 30 millimeters plus 1 inch? And yes, you can add, subtract, divide, and multiply inside of the actual dimension dialog. So yes, you can add those things together. Okay, so that is changing units and using a combination of units. Again, defaults can be changed under your account settings. An important tip that I have for the users out there is just know where that account setting is. There's a lot of tips that I'm going to give you here today that all go back to that preferences of the account settings. So that is number 16 on our list of tech tips. Now, the next one that I want to mention is sharing with a link. And again, this is just another question that I get asked often, especially in webinars. Is it possible to share with someone that doesn't use Onshape? And I think that's the big question. What if I have this design and I want to send it to someone and just have them look at it? Is it possible to do that without having them create an Onshape account first? And the answer is yes. In the share dialog, there's an option for link. And what it will do is it will generate a unique link that you could send to anyone. And as long as they open it up in a modern browser, anything but Internet Explorer, it will work. They can view the model. They can even, if you give them permission, copy and export. Right. So just keep in mind, you can create a viewable link that anyone can use. Anyone, even if they're not logged in to Onshape, even if they don't have an Onshape account. So real quickly, this is an easy one to show. Let's say, for instance, I wanted to share my bike frame design. I can click share, go to link, make link viewable. That's the button. I click it. It will generate a link. Here's the link. And I can send that to anyone. Okay? Again, they don't need a special browser. Right? They don't need a special account. Right? They just need, Chrome, Opera, Firefox, Safari, and here is, by the way, that model. So I'm not logged into Onshape. You can see I can sign in or create an account. This is an incognito tab, but I'm not logged in, and you can see I can access the model view only. So if you're looking to share your model view only with someone and you don't want them to have to worry about creating an Onshape account, sharing with a link is a great way to do it. Now, what happens if I want to later remove that access? And this is another commonly asked question when we talk about sharing with a link. Okay, I've shared with this link. Is it infinite? Do they have access to that forever? And the answer is no. Let's say that you're done sharing. You can click the X and that link becomes invalid. And no one can access the design through that link. All right, so you can generate a new one if you choose to and share it again, but keep in mind you still remain in control even when sharing with a link. You just got to remove the permission once you're done using it. Okay. Question, is the link you shared the same one as in the search bar of the browser? It looked similar. Yes, all I did was copy and paste that link into my browser. And that's all whoever you send this to has to do. Or you can just put it into an email, for example, and they click the link in the email and they're taken to your CAD model. So just keep in mind, yes, you can copy and paste that right into a browser and it will take you right to that model. And you don't have to sign in to see it. And I think that's the big thing. Of course, I can just share, this URL if I'm shared in the document, and someone else is, and we're both signed into Onshape. But the big thing I think a lot of users want is I want to be able to share with someone. They don't need an Onshape account just to look at it. That's where sharing with a link is particularly valuable. And again, under share, there's a tab for link. So, question, can you share a dynamic link? So if I spin, it spins for the other user. No. But I will show you a technique in a bit called follow mode, which will allow you to do something similar to that. But the key thing there is both users need to be logged in. This will give the user an independent view of your model. They can rotate it independently of what you're doing on yours. And just like all Onshape, once you update it, the data will update for the viewer looking at that link. Question, could the shared link be used in SimScale, for example? To be honest, I would have to test that. You could use the link of the model itself, assuming you have an Onshape account, but I'm not sure if using just a share-only link would be useful enough to pull the Onshape model, especially because there's an export permission associated with it. So if you don't check that, then SimScale won't be able to collaborate with Onshape. So there's a whole different series of issues when we talk about using it for a partner application. But if you're just trying to share your model with someone, sending them that link should work just fine. All right, so moving on, that is the share with a link. And again, the key thing there, they don't need an Onshape account. They don't need to do anything special. They just literally click a link and then we're looking at the same model you are. Now that's tech tip number 15. Let's move on to number 14 in our list, and that is customize, rotate, pan, and zoom. And again, this is just one of those things that I get asked really, really often. Can I change the zoom settings? Can I change how Onshape rotates or pans? I'm used to XYZ CAD application, SolidWorks, Creo, one of those types of CAD applications. Can I make my mouse settings match those CAD applications? And rotate, pan, and zoom key, seems to be the big one. As I'm coming from SolidWorks or if I'm coming from another CAD application, I don't want to have to relearn rotate, pan, and zoom. I just want to make it match what I'm used to. And again, this is another example where you'll find options in your account settings. So I mentioned it before, but your account settings are very much what we're going to talk about here today in terms of managing all these preferences that you may have. So going back to our account settings, if I scroll down just a bit more, and just to recap again, under your username, right? So under your username, manage account, you'll find preferences. Scroll down and you'll find view manipulation. Now, by default, of course, you have the Onshape default, but you can change the settings to match other CAD applications. So this is particularly useful if you've come from another CAD application and you want to try and match those settings. If I wanted SolidWorks settings, I could select SolidWorks, and now I have middle mouse has the rotate, and pan is control plus middle mouse. So it just matches those settings. It reverses the scroll wheel direction, for example. So just keep in mind, you can set it to other CAD applications. You can also, as a simple measure, just reverse the scroll wheel direction. That's another commonly asked one. I don't care about every other mouse setting is fine. I just can't stand that it's going the opposite direction from what I'm expecting. Well, that's reverse scroll wheel direction. You check the box. Important thing to keep in mind, after you've changed your settings, make sure to click the big Save View Manipulation Settings button. An important last step before actually testing it out. So again, make sure, same goes with the options I was referring to earlier, you have to click Save for it to actually be initiated. Now, a neat thing that I want to point out with this is not specific to your computer. So anywhere you log into Onshape, you're now going to have these settings. You're going to have those units. You're going to have shortcut toolbars that match. So the neat thing about our account settings is you could log into any computer and it's going to have your account settings. As soon as you log into our Onshape account, it doesn't matter what computer it is, what browser they're running, your settings go with you. Question: do you support Space M Ice? I do not believe so, no. So view manipulation is a common one. How do I change the rotate, pan, and zoom settings that Onshape has? I'm used to this CAD application. Can I make it, feel the same? And again, you'll find those options under your account settings. So again, in the top right corner under your username, manage account, preferences, you'll find these options. All right, so that is tech tip number 14. Number 13, copy and paste. This is another frequently asked question. I have these sketches that I always reuse, or I have these features that I always reuse, these parts that I always reuse. Is there a way to copy and paste sketches, sketch entities, parts, and so on? And the answer is yes. If you're using Windows or Linux, you can use Control-C, Control-V. So those that are fans of keyboard shortcuts, those keyboard shortcuts are supported. So you can Control-C a sketch and Control-V a sketch or a part. If you're using a Mac, it's Command-C, Command-V. Again, the very common keyboard shortcuts if you do a lot of this in your day-to-day life. But the other thing, it's all available in the right-click menu as well. So when you right-click a sketch, you'll see options. I've highlighted them here. Copy sketch entities, which will allow you to copy and paste. Right. So just keep in mind, you can copy and paste sketches, parts, etc. with Control-C, Control-V, or the right-click menu. Now, I see a few questions that I've missed. Can I change mouse button behavior in 3D and 2D separately, or is it a master change? Right now, there is just one change, so you don't have independent control over it. Question: I think the other listener was asking about 3D mice, which I think works. Yes. If you're using a 3D connection mouse, they work great. Make sure to download the latest driver from 3D Connections, and it just simply works. There's not much to do on your part besides making sure you have that latest driver from 3D Connection. Question: can you create a child copy of a sketch to update with any changes made to the parent sketch? The answer is yes. You'll want to use the derived feature to accomplish this. What I'm going to show you now, the simple copy and paste, does not update. And that's an important caveat to note. What I'm going to show you now, copy and paste sketch entities creates different entities. It copies and pastes them, but they're not linked to the original. If you want, the original to drive the copied entities, I would recommend using the derived feature. That will give you, a little bit more control over that. All right, so let's get into this. Again, very simple to show. So I'm not going to get into too great a detail on it. But the key thing is, again, you can Control C, Control V. You can use the right-click menu. It's entirely up to you. I'm on a Mac here, so this could be Command C, Command V. Right? I can right-click copy, right-click paste. That's one easy way to accomplish it, and it's a simple matter to take a single sketch like this and paste it onto several planes or flat, planar faces. So again, right click copy, Command C, Command V, Control C, Control V if you're using Windows or Linux. And again, these are not linked to the original. So you still will need to come in and constrain this or edit the dimensions and so on. Right. By the way, a great technique if you're creating a lot of loft profiles. I think that's what a lot of users really love, copy and paste sketch, because oftentimes your loft profiles can be similar, but not the same. Right? So here's 3 different ellipses. Very quickly copy and paste the sketch, and then I can loft between them rather quickly. So I show a loft, but just keep in mind anytime you need to copy and paste a sketch, right click on it or use Control C, Command C, Control C, Command V to copy and paste. Question, how do you control where it's pasted? Well, it's going to paste in the same orientation and position as the original, but it's not constrained in any way. You'll notice that I still had to attach that ellipse back to the origin. So it's going to copy and paste it in the same exact position that was originally created. Now, if you rotate them all around, then it's going to orient it relative to that. But just keep in mind, you still will need to edit the sketch and position it accordingly. Okay. So, does copy paste work between part studios or between documents? No. That's where you'll need to use the derived feature. And it's another good point. I can't go to a different document and paste this sketch in. I need to use the derived feature to accomplish that. So it's a very good point. No, this is specific to the tab that you're in. Okay, so that's copy and paste sketches. Now, the same thing applies with parts, for example. So if I were to jump into an assembly, another commonly asked question, I have a dozen different links or I have a dozen different bolts that I need to insert into my assembly. Can I copy and paste? And the answer is yes. You can Command C, Command V, just the way you would with a file in your Finder, or Control C, Control V, just like you would with a file in Windows Explorer. So here I've copied and pasted the link arm just using Command C, Command V. Now in this case, if I do this again, Command C, it's going to position it wherever my cursor is. So if my cursor is up here, Command V, that's where it will be placed. So just keep that in mind as you're pasting parts in. They're going to drop in wherever your cursor's at that moment. So copy and paste parts, copy and paste sketch entity. Oh, I didn't mention that. I should jump back to that just briefly. I showed you copy and paste sketch. Right click there. But you can actually, within a sketch, copy individual sketch entities. So let's say that I had another circle over here and I wanted to copy and paste it. I can right click the actual sketch entity and say copy sketch entities and paste sketch entities. And that will give me a copy of just the circle and not the entire sketch. So if you ever wanted to copy and paste pieces of a sketch, just window select or select the pieces that you want to copy, and you'll see in the right click menu, copy sketch entities, which will copy just what you've highlighted. And then you can right click anywhere and paste sketch entities. So it's a useful way to copy and reuse, something that you've created a lot of or that you need a lot of without having to reconstruct it over and over again. Now, by default, as soon as you do this, it will then take you into the transform command, and then you can just left click and drag and move the thing around as you see fit, right? But it's important to keep in mind when you're doing this, you must left click to accept. That's the last step, and it's easy to miss that one. So just keep in mind, you can copy and paste individual entities. It will drop you into a transform command afterwards, and then you can move that around. A few questions. Bear with me for just 1 second here. Okay, so a few questions. Forgive me there. Does copy and paste work between Part Studios and Document? I mentioned that one. And by the way, I'm actually wrong about that. And the user pointed this out. I just copied and pasted between Part Studios. When we initially released it, it wasn't supported. But as of a few updates ago, you can copy and paste sketches between Part Studios and documents. So I'm correcting myself there. The question earlier, can I copy and paste a sketch into a different Part Studio or a different document? The answer is yes. Yes, you can. So forgive me there. I got that one wrong earlier. And question, I use the 3D Connection mouse with my, forgive me, it works great. Yeah, so just mentioning again, 3D Connection mice do work with Onshape. Make sure to have the latest driver. All right, so jumping back to our slides here, let's get back into it. So tech tip number 13, copy and paste sketches, parts, and so on using Command-C, Command-V, Control-C, Control-V, or the right-click menu. Now, a next big tech tip that I have for you is Final. Tech tip number 12, Final. And this one is particularly important if you do a lot of small manipulations to sketches, and then you find yourself going back into the feature to let it rebuild, and then going back into the sketch to edit, going back to the feature, and so on. So what we've tried to do with Final is eliminate the back and forth. And the idea behind it is it allows you to preview the final result of the finished part while editing a sketch. And the big thing is you can edit a sketch and see its impact on the entire design live. And the reason that's so important is, again, if you edit a sketch, click OK, let it rebuild, figure out it's not what you wanted, then you have to edit the sketch again, change it again, rebuild again. So it creates this loop that you have to go through. With Final, you see it update live and you don't have to do the back and forth. Now, the key thing is you'll find the Final button in a sketch dialog of any sketch that's used by a feature. So once you create a feature with a sketch, when you edit that sketch, you'll see the Final button in the dialog. So the example I'd like to give, and there's lots of examples where this is useful, so it's not specific to lofts again, but I always like to point out the loft example because often in a loft, you spend a lot of time manipulating the loft to get it exactly the way you want it. And here's an example where I'm lofting between the handle and this shape down here, and I have 4 different splines that are guides for my finished loft. And this is an example where if I wanted to make a change, let's say that I'm not satisfied with the transition here, I grab this, I pull it down, okay, I'm satisfied. It isn't until I hit the green check and let it rebuild that I actually see what happened with my loft. Maybe it broke, maybe it doesn't look right, it still doesn't look quite right. Now I got to go back to the sketch, right click, edit sketch. And so it creates this cycle that a lot of users get stuck in. So that's where this really comes into play. So instead of making the change, hitting the green check, waiting for it to rebuild, you can click Final in the sketch dialog and it will give you the finished result. And the neat thing is now I can grab this spline, drag it, and it will live update the loft. It will manipulate the loft live, and I don't have to wait for the geometry to rebuild, right? So I can dynamically see things shift and update without having to green check, wait for it to rebuild, and so on. So any sketch that's used by a feature, you'll see the Final button in that dialog. Okay? And just keep in mind, it will allow you to dynamically update to any changes that you make in the sketch. So that is Final. Let's move on to our next tip, and that is left-click drag in sketching. And so there's a few examples where this is particularly helpful, but I think the big one is the offset command. So if you've ever tried to do an offset in Onshape, you can window select or you can left-click individual entities, but if you have a lot of geometry that you want to offset at once, it can be tedious to do that. So a tip that I have is instead of left-clicking, left-click drag, and you'll get that offset. So let's jump into a document here. There's 2 places where I think this is particularly useful, and both of them are at the sketch level. So let's edit this simple rectangle. And the first thing I want to do is I want to fillet these corners. So if you've ever used the sketch fillet command, very simple. Select sketch fillet, click a point, and enter a value, right? 0.5. So there's a 0.5 sketch fillet. And I can continue clicking points and it will continue adding fillets. So it's a simple command, but I think for a lot of users, they may not necessarily know, I don't know the exact value that I want for a radius. I just wanted roughly this size or roughly matching some other shape. And so a tip that I have is, again, this left click drag. So if I select sketch fillet, just like I did a moment ago, but instead of left clicking the point, I left click drag the point, I get a dynamically resizing fillet. And this is particularly helpful if if you want to kind of eyeball it, so to speak. If I want to get it roughly right about there, let go. Okay, that's 2.625. So it's a great way to see visually the size of the fillet before actually placing it, right? And you don't have to go through the effort of changing the values or double clicking the values and watching it update. It does it dynamically. And again, just like the example I showed a moment ago, if I keep clicking points, it will just keep adding more sketch fillets. So that's a big one in the sketch fillet command. When you're doing a sketch fillet, left click drag a point instead of left clicking an individual point, and you'll get that dynamic resizing behavior. Now, the other example I have, and I think it's the more common one, is the offset command. So let's say that I want to offset all of this geometry at once. I could select offset and then select the pieces. And if you've done this, you can left click individual pieces, and it's kind of a time consuming, tedious process. And if you have dozens of lines and arcs, it's not very practical. I can window select. That's another way to accomplish it. But a big tip that I have, and it's just a common scenario, is I want to offset everything associated with this chain of geometry. So I select offset, and again I use the left click drag. So instead of left clicking an individual piece of it, I left click drag one piece and it will grab the entire chain of entities. So I don't have to left click individual pieces. I don't have to window select beforehand. I just left click drag one of the pieces and it will automatically grab everything. And that's the key difference between just left clicking and left click dragging one of the pieces of geometry that you want to offset. Enter your offset, and there's our offset geometry. So again, big tip, left click drag on an entity will offset the entire chain. Left click dragging a point in the sketch fillet command will allow you to dynamically resize the sketch fillet and place it on the value that you want. So again, two big tips, both of them at the sketch level, and they're both using that left click drag as opposed to just simple left clicking. All right, so moving on. Tech tip number 10, shift select when importing. And this is another one if you work a lot with external data. If I find myself importing PDFs, or maybe I have 10 parts that came from some other vendor or SolidWorks or something, and I need to bring in all 10 parts into my document. You don't have to individually select files to import. You don't have to import them one at a time. You can shift select as many as you'd like and import them all at once. So if I go to the import command, so in the bottom left corner, create a tab, let's go to import. I can browse and shift select all the files that I want to import. Okay. So just keep in mind, I'm shift selecting 5 different, this is an image, a PDF, a text file, a spreadsheet, and a JPEG. And I'm hit open, and it will import all of those files at once. So just keep in mind, again, you can import multiple files in one shot. You can import an entire folder just by shift selecting it if you choose to, and it will drop everything into that document all in one shot. Okay. Question, does the chain entity selection work with anything else? I'm not aware of any limitations to chain. In particular, construction geometry, I'm not aware of a limitation. I have to try it to be certain, but I'm fairly confident there are no other limitations. Question, any way to import directly from Dropbox or Google Drive? The answer is no, not today. That is something that's been discussed in the past. We do have APIs that allow you to accomplish similar things, but there's no tool that I can point you to today that would allow you to do that. Will you post the presentation on the internet? Yes. Keep in mind, all of our webinars we try to post on our YouTube channel. So we have a playlist of past webinars on our YouTube channel, and we will send out a recording, a link to this webinar once it's posted. Okay, so that is import. And again, you're importing multiple files at once. And it's just for those users that maybe have a lot of CAD data or a lot of project-related files that they want to store in the document. You don't have to import one at a time. All right, so tech tip number 9, roll to here, roll to end. And this is another useful right-click menu option. And I think for a lot of users, the big thing here is just not having to use the rollback bar if they don't want to. So we're all familiar with, as we're designing, we grab the bar, we roll back to a point, and we roll back down. And, that's a fine way if you want to roll through your design. That certainly works. But I want to show you just a shortcut that a lot of users like. Let's say that I want to roll to extrude 3 here in my feature list. Rather than grabbing the bar and dragging it up and then situating it between sketch 2 and sketch 3, or excuse me, extrude 3, I can just right click and say roll to here. And that will roll the bar to that point in the feature list. So I think for a lot of users, grabbing and dragging the bar can be a lot more tedious than just right-clicking the feature and saying, okay, roll back to this point. And once you're done, you can right-click the bar itself and just say roll to end, and it will roll all the way down to the end. Okay, so right-click menu, you have roll to here. You have options like roll to here, which will then update. So if I right-click another feature and say roll to here, it will roll to that point as well. But you also have roll to end. So a big one that I have is, again, just right-click the feature. You don't have to grab the bar and drag up and down. All right, so moving on. The next one in my list, tech tip number 8, multiple browser tabs. And this is the question comes in a number of different forms, but essentially it's, do you support having multiple Onshape tabs open at the same time? And the answer is yes. And another question we get asked is, do you support multiple monitors? And the answer is yes. And it's kind of a byproduct of running in a browser. It's one of the neat benefits of being a browser-based application. So you can have as many Onshape tabs open as you would like. You can have parts open, assemblies open, drawings open. You can see things live update if you choose to. You can move as many tabs to as many monitors as you would like, right? Because again, that's part of your browser functionality. So you can create multiple tabs. You can move tabs to different monitors. You can right-click a tab, and we even have a dedicated option to open a new browser tab. So just keep in mind, yes, you can have as many tabs as you want. You can put them on as many monitors as you want. And we even have an option to right-click, open a new browser tab. And that's another commonly asked question. Is it possible quickly from a document to right-click another tab and open it in a different browser or different browser tab? And the answer is yes. Right-click here. And because, again, we're a browser, I can grab this and drag it over to a different monitor. I can snap it up to this one. I can, move it in any way that I'd like. So, again, kind of a byproduct of running in a browser, but yes, you can have as many tabs and they can be on as many monitors as you'd like. All right, so a few questions. It would be nice if the keyboard shortcuts were shown in the standard menus. And this is a comment from a user. And I do want to point out, if you do hover for a moment, bear with me for a second here. If you hover over a command in the toolbar, it will give you the keyboard shortcut. So if I hover over the extrude command, you'll see it's Shift-E. If I hover over the fillet command, it's Shift-F, right? So if it has a keyboard shortcut, you will see it in that dropdown. Now, another tip that I have is all of our keyboard shortcuts are under the Help menu. Now, you can't customize them as of today, but that's also something that we're working on. All right, so let's move on to the next one on my list, and that is green check to insert parts. And this is actually a pretty simple one, but one that a lot of new users will miss. When you're first building your assembly, when you're first starting to insert parts into your assembly, one of the more common questions is, how do I place the part origin on the assembly origin? And how do I fix it? I'm always inserting and building this, set of assemblies, and I always want to start with a fixed part. And the answer to inserting the part in the correct position is using the green check on the first part. And all it means is it attaches the part origin to the assembly origin without any additional work. You don't have to mate the part into place. It just snaps into that center point of your assembly. So it's a big tip that I have. It just saves you from having to mate the part into the correct position over the origin later. But I do want to point this out. The part that you insert still needs to be fixed when you're doing this. So it doesn't mean that it automatically fixes it, and that still needs to be done um, while you're creating it. So just real quickly here, let's create an assembly. And I'm inserting my first part into my assembly. So I go to Insert, I choose the part that I want, let's say part 1. Now the easy mistake to make is to left click out here, to move my cursor out and just left click and place it. The tip that I have is, instead of left clicking out here in the graphics and positioning it randomly, click the green check and it will place that part right on the origin of the assembly. Now, as I mentioned before, you still need to fix it. It's still free to move, but it's easy to do that. Just right-click and fix. So now I've inserted my base part into my assembly. I've fixed it relative to the origin, and I didn't have to do any kind of special mates to accomplish this. So I know a simple tech tip, but I think one that a lot of new users will miss. Use the green check to accept inserting that first part, and that will automatically position it in the assembly origin, and then everything else you can just left click in space and mate up the way you want to. So that is placing your first part into the assembly. Make sure to use that green check. Now, a very similar thing that I want to point out is when you're inserting parts, just like we did a moment ago, there's also what we call snap mode, which is supported. And snap mode, if you haven't used it, is essentially a way to snap one part to another, to automatically mate just by dragging one over the other. And the neat thing about this is you can do this as you're inserting parts, which means I can insert a part and mate a part in a single step. And it makes inserting parts much faster. Now, there's a few caveats. The first and most important is this only works with custom mate connectors. So you have to create a mate connector in the parts that you want to insert. And then with snap mode on, when you start to insert parts, it will automatically grab that mate connector and try and attach it to the parts that you may have in your assembly. So again, it means parts can be inserted and mated in a single step. So let's jump into an example of this. Now, the key thing I want to point out is, here's the assembly we created a moment ago. This is just a simple pneumatic cylinder. So it's got a few dozen parts in it. And what I'd like to do is start snapping these parts into place. The key thing, as I mentioned, here's the finished assembly, by the way. You'll notice the end caps for this assembly have these mate connectors defined. And if we jump into the Part Studio, you'll see custom mate connectors. Scroll down here. Custom mate connectors have been defined on the two end caps of this cylinder. As I mentioned before, this only works with custom mate connectors. But the beauty of it is, if you do, a lot of tedious manual assembly of it, if I create that mate connector once, anytime I insert it into any other assembly, I can turn on snap mode and automatically attach it. So let me show you how this works. So we've created our mate connectors for those end caps. Now I'm ready to assemble them. Step 1, make sure to turn on snap mode. Right? So now I've turned on snap mode. Now I can go to Insert and select the part that I want to snap in. As I select the part, it will automatically attach, but I can choose different mate connectors on the part to attach it to. But the key thing is, I'm not going into the mate command. I just click on the part and it automatically attaches, and I can select whatever attachment point that I want. Okay? Left click to place it. What you'll notice about this is it automatically creates a mate. Now, of course, you can edit the mate and change it if you need to, but in this case, I've already fastened that end cap to the end of the barrel. Right? Let's do the same thing, part 5. I'll choose the mate connector on the end here. And so now I've inserted the two end caps and mated them in place with two fasten mates using snap mode. Okay. So again, I know for some users out there, snap mode may be new in general. Snap mode just allows you to drag one part over another and automatically mate it. This is just adding one more step by allowing you to do that while inserting the part initially. And so, I give the example of a bolt to a hole. If I do a lot of mating a bolt to a hole, I create one mate connector on the bolt. I can then attach that bolt to every hole automatically as I'm inserting it, and not as a separate step after I've inserted it. So just meant to speed up the assembly process. There's lots of tools in the assembly level to speed up the process. This is just one simple tip, and it's just something that I think a lot of users overlook. that, if used properly, can really speed up the design. All right, so I see a few questions. Bear with me. Um, can you show how to create internal gear teeth using the Boolean from the Part Studio tool? That's a little more specific than we're going to get into in this webinar. I would definitely look at the public model examples. There's quite a few there. I don't have any specific examples, and again, that's a little more specific than I wanted to get into with this webinar. What are the caveats for importing supported drawing formats that could actually be editable in Onshape? DXF and DWG are the two formats that we support. We have some limited editing capabilities, and you can drop it into a sketch and extrude it or evolve it, or turn it into a 3D model. I'll show you an example of that in just a second. All right, so snap mode while inserting is a very common one. I think that a lot of users can overlook. The next one I want to mention is adding comments. And this is something that, again, it can be very, very useful when you're sharing. And even just a way to track notes for yourself. Comments are built into Onshape. It's a little icon in the interface that allows you to store any text that you'd like. And the neat thing is you can tag almost anything in Onshape with a comment. So I can tag a feature, I can tag a sketch, I can tag a face, an edge, a part in my assembly. And the neat thing is, it will associate the comment with that feature, and anyone else in the document will also see the association. And the reason for this, I think a lot of users today are sending screenshots with big arrows pointing to, this is the part that I'm talking about, or this is the fillet that's too big. If I add a comment in the document, I see exactly what they're referring to on the same model that, again, we're both looking at. So collaborators in the document see a visual cue. So when you add a comment, you'll see a little notification that a comment has been created. And again, you see it in the same orientation and zoom level. So when you create a comment, it captures the zoom level of the model and the orientation of the model. And when someone else clicks on your comment, it rotates the model around so that it shows them the same orientation that you created the comment in. So very easy to convey, is this the right diameter? Is this fillet radius right? Because they're looking at the face, the edge, the feature in the actual document. So let me show you how you might use this. Let's say, for example, I wanted to share this. And you can see I've already shared this with Cody, right? I've already shared this with another user, which means another user could jump into that document at any time. Now, the neat thing is I can say, okay, well, what if I needed to communicate with that other person? Let's say that I wanted to communicate, is this the right hole diameter? I can right-click the edge, the face, the feature, whatever it is that I may want to tag, and you'll see the option to add comment. So if I click add comment, and I can say, is this diameter right? Question mark, click add. They will get a little notification that a comment has been created. You'll also see a little notification in the graphics that a comment has been tagged to that feature. So you'll see a little comment symbol here. And the neat thing is you can click it. It highlights the comment in the graphics. You can click the comment in the graphics. It will highlight the edge in the model. So again, just trying to illustrate, you're tagging a feature, a face, an edge, something with a comment. And the neat thing is you can chat right inside the document. You'll get email notifications. If you've signed up for it, it's a default option, by the way. You'll see receive comment email notifications. But a real-time chat, so you can see it's updated live. Yes, it's half inch, and we can chat inside of it. Now, I mentioned before, it captures the zoom level. So the neat thing is, let's say that I've shared this with another user, and they have the model in some odd orientation, maybe like this, and they're not sure, maybe they're looking at it from this perspective. They don't know, what diameter is he referring to? Well, if I click the comment, click the edge, it will take me back to the same orientation and same zoom level that the comment was created in. So it's very easy to convey this is the hole I'm referring to because, again, you're looking at it the same exact way the person that created the comment was looking at it. So that's comments. It's integrated right into Onshape. You can tag edges. I can right-click a feature and add a comment, a part, anything just about, and tag it with a comment, and it will capture everything for me, and we can communicate right inside of the document. So, question. Tip, link to part with view is with history state. Link to part with views, because if I change the part, for example, in extrude, it's not there anymore. Link to part with view is with history state. If you're referring to using a derived feature to link in a part, keep in mind that you must create a version for it to update. And forgive me if I'm misunderstanding. Can you hide the comment? Anytime you collapse that comments menu, it goes away. It's not visible. So I don't see the graphic, comment icon until I actually click comments in the top right here, and then it pops up. Okay. And then clicking the comments, collapsing that menu will remove those. Question: after a comment is made with the initial orientation, will it regenerate if you move the view or you reply? No. No, if you create a new comment, it will capture that orientation, but just simply replying doesn't change the orientation. All right, so moving on. Tech tip number 5, again, add comments. Comments is a big one. Just try right-clicking on the thing that you want to add a comment to, and you'll see it in that right-click menu. So a great way to collaborate, and I think a lot of users will eliminate that screenshot markup email workflow that you may be used to. All right, so the next one, the shortcut toolbar. And this one's actually a fairly common one, but it's something that we get asked a lot. Do you have a shortcut toolbar? Can I customize the shortcut toolbar? Can I have a quick access toolbar? Those kinds of questions, or we'll hope to answer with this new functionality. So if you're not familiar with it, I believe it's the last update or the update before, so either 3 to 6 weeks ago, we added this new shortcut toolbar. And in short, if you click the S key on the keyboard, you get a toolbar that will pop up at your cursor. And the toolbar is context sensitive. So if I hit the S key while in a sketch, I see sketch commands. If I hit the S key while in an assembly, I see assembly commands. And so it's context sensitive. It's relative to the environment you're in. And you can customize it. So you can change what's in the shortcut toolbar, again, under your manage account settings. So back in the same spot I was showing you earlier with the units and the rotate, pan, and zoom, this is another example of something you can customize under your account settings. So let me show you it first. Let's jump into a sketch first off. So I'm going to edit a sketch. And again, I'm just going to use the S key to call up the shortcut toolbar. So wherever your cursor is, let's put my cursor over here in the top right. I tap S, and there is my shortcut toolbar. Okay, let's get out of the sketch. S, and you'll see the toolbar changes. So now that I'm no longer in a sketch, I see things like extrude, revolve, sweep, loft, fillet, chamfer, and so on. Right, so again, just keep in mind, if I jump into an assembly here, S, I see insert, mate connector, fasten, all the various mate types. So just keep in mind the S key on your keyboard will initiate that shortcut toolbar, and the shortcut toolbar will appear wherever your cursor is. Now, of course, the next question that I often get asked is, can I change what's in the toolbar? Can I customize it? And the answer is yes. A tip that I have is you can right-click and customize that toolbar, and then choose where you want to customize it. Now, a limitation today is there is no shortcut toolbar for drawings. That's something we hope to add in the future, but you can customize it for Sketch, Part Studio, and Assembly. So I can click Sketch and say, okay, I want to add the revolve command to my Sketch shortcut toolbar. Or I can go into Part Studio and say, let's add the draft command to my shortcut toolbar. So you can customize it like all of the settings that I've shown you so far. Make sure to click save when you're done. And like all the settings that I've shown you so far, this will apply to any computer that you log on to. So it's not specific to your computer. If you log on from a different device, all these settings carry over. So that is the shortcut toolbar. Again, you use the S key and you can customize it. All right, so I'm running out of time here. Just a couple minutes left. Bear with me. Import DXF and export DXF. This is another commonly asked one. You can import a DXF very easily, and you can also export any geometry very easily as well. So give me just a second here. Let me refresh my DXF. This is a DXF that I've imported. Right. And again, limited ability to change things, but I can grab and manipulate and change a few things around here. And you can also insert it into a sketch. Right. So insert DXF, choose that DXF, and it will drop it into a sketch. Okay. All right. So the next one on my list By the way, export DXF, I didn't mention this, but is also in the right-click menu. You can right-click any face or sketch and export as a DXF. Follow mode. The next one on my list is follow mode, and I think for users out there, this is an easy one to miss. If you double-click the social cue in the top right corner, you're looking at their screen in real time. And the question came up earlier, is it possible to show them the same exact orientation that I am? If you double-click their icon, you're looking at their screen in real time. And so I can see, okay, this person's trying to point out this hole to me because I'm looking at their screen in real time. So again, follow mode, double-click their social cue. All right, so all of these tech tips, we've boiled it down to the last one, and that is compare. And compare is a very useful function for, again, comparing geometry. And a lot of users have asked, is there a way to see what's different between my design today and 6 months ago? Or is there a way to see what's different between revision A and revision B? And the answer is yes, it's compare. And it's an underused tool, but I highly recommend it. It's one of the big benefits of Onshape, and it really allows you to do some powerful stuff. So here I have this suspension swing arm from that bike frame. And if I go to the versions, you'll see I've got revision A that was created August of last year. All right, so August 2015, revision A was created. If I left click it, you'll see the design was different. Right, if it's the same color, but really everything else is different. I have shorter holes. I don't have a big boss in the end. These cutouts are different. So there's a lot of changes between revision A and main, which is the way it currently sits today. And so the inevitable question is, how can I tell exactly what's different between this and revision A? And the answer is compare. So in your history, in your branches, in your versions, you can go into any one of these things and choose compare. And this will give you two things. It will give you a list of the differences, and it will give you a graphical slider showing you the differences. So I think a lot of users out there want to know the specifics. Show me every sketch that's different, every feature that's different. Show me what's different within those things. And you can do all of that. So on the left side, you'll see the list. I can see this sketch one is not the same. Extrude one is not the same. If I left click on it, it will tell me what's different. Right, I can see the depth is 20 millimeters here, 22 millimeters in revision A. So I see exactly what's different. I see what exists in one and not the other. Fillet 7 existed in revision A, doesn't exist in main. Right? Chamfer 1 exists in main, but doesn't exist in revision A. So I'm getting a specific list of everything that's different, and I get a graphic slider showing me visually the difference between them. And you can do this you can go to any moment in your history. Just go back 6 months in your history and compare the design. And it will show you everything that's different in that part studio. So just keep in mind, again, compare, very useful function, very underused, and it's automatically built in. You don't have to do anything special here. You can go back in your history 6 months and say, just compare the design to today. So definitely worth checking out. Make sure to check out that compare command. So I know I'm over time. I know there are a few questions that I haven't answered, so bear with me. I'm going to stick around and answer them, but I want to let everyone go. So I want to say thank you, everyone, for joining. If you would stick around for just a moment, but that's really what I had planned for you, so thank you.